Thanks, Jen, and thanks everybody so much for your thoughtful and insightful presentations. I can't wait to jump into our discussion here tonight. And I just want to reiterate, please do write in with questions, folks, because we really want this to be a conversation, so we want to include you as well. So I want to start out with a question for Sajel. And something that you said, I'm a writer, right? So I love words, I love turns of phrase, and I would love to hear you expand on what you mean by mental wealth.
Mental wealth. Well, we're all born with a certain resilience, with strengths, with so many good things because we've been overcoming challenges right from the beginning, as soon as we're born. And so we really are born with mental health, mental wealth, mental stability. It's when things get too overwhelming, when things get, too packed on, when we're not using our social connections, our ability to process emotionally and cognitively all the things that are bothering us and being able to disseminate that slowly, it's when it compounds. And that's where we feel like we can't deal with it anymore. And we starting to get into the mental illnesses. And we have to remember that mental health is typically built on a medical model, which is always looking at the deficits. And positive psychology and the work that I do, we're looking at the opposite. We're taking both into consideration. What's working really well, and how can we leverage that to help with what's not?
I love that kind of taking a positive, flipping the script on a lot of the conversations that we have about mental health. That's awesome. And I have a question for Dianna now, kind of building on that sort of positive impact that you're experiencing from working from home. And you mentioned that you've gained a lot of valuable energy and spoons from being able to work from home and avoiding some of the barriers that you would otherwise encounter. And you mentioned working on some accessibility passion projects. And I know that you were instrumental in working on inputting accessibility information into Google Maps. And I'd just love to hear you share more about that particular project, if you'd care to.
Yeah. So, as a Googler, Google gives you a lot of flexibility in the projects that you work on. So you have your 80% project. This is kind of the main thing you focus on during the day. But then you also have like 20% of your time to focus on something that you're just really passionate about, or something that really personally resonates with you. So a couple years ago, there was an accessibility kind of sprint, a hackathon, which brought together Googlers from all over who were just passionate about accessibility projects. And one of the projects there was on finding routes from A to B that a wheelchair could go through. And this is something that I had been wanting ever since I started driving in the wheelchair and realizing that I could use Google to get me from place to place. And so it was really just an incredible opportunity to work with folks on the transit team in Australia, work with folks in New York, work with folks in Colorado. We were just kind of united by this passion to do something that was cool, that was useful, and that would benefit a large population of users out there. So yeah, we released the feature to have an accessible routes option in Google Maps now. Whether you're on a phone or on the computer, you can get from point A to point B with accessible route. And I think this also kind of speaks to like people with disabilities, workers with disabilities really understanding the needs of the user base, of people who have accessibility needs. So it's kind of driving innovation and inclusion both in the workplace and beyond the workplace.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that touches on something that's come up in all four of your presentations tonight, which was the word adaptability. And for example, Dianna, you said like you have a certain amount of time that you could put towards other projects working at Google. And I wanted to hear Emile's take on adaptability and kind of what you think that has, the role of adaptability has in terms of the economic benefit that you mentioned earlier about that that huge number, the $340 billion number.
Yeah, that is a big number, isn't it? Yeah, that's a good question. We often talk about inclusive design in this field, where we make things more inclusive for different abilities. And I think we all gain from that. You know, when things are easier to use, it's easier for everybody to use. You know, technology can be overwhelming even for me, and I struggle sometimes. So if they can make, you know, some of the technology easier, we'd all benefit from it being more productive. You know, so I think that adaptability is really critical. The flexibility too, because in some cases you need to customize things for different people's needs, kind of thing. So a lot of new technologies have lots of options to make it adaptable for different kinds of contexts and different kinds of needs and abilities, kind of thing. So I think the universal design with some customization is a critical way to go, and that's the way we're seeing both the built environment, the technology, and also the social environment too, making your work context fit your needs, kind of thing. If you need to work from home some days, if you want to work different hours because you're not a morning person, that kind of thing, that flexibility and adaptability for the customization for people's, you know, individual preferences and needs, it really makes a difference. And often, as we found, doesn't even cost very much. It's just a negotiating, you know, your work arrangements with your supervisor. We all need some of that flexibility for work-life balance, whether it's for our personal needs or family life needs, you know, taking the kids to school in the morning, so you start a little bit later or something like that. So I think that's the way we can really capture and create an opportunity for everybody to be engaged as much as they're willing and able to be.
Right on. And that kind of leads into a question that I have for Maureen, which was about the lack of sort of adapted work from home setups that you mentioned, Maureen, as one of the barriers to work from home. And I just want to say, you know, hearing different perspectives on the work from home conversation is so wonderful because, for example, it works great for you, Dianna, and then Maureen, you mentioned, you know, for some other people, it doesn't. And so I just want to hear more about what employers might be able to do for people right now in terms of remedying the work from home arrangements and sort of like adaptability of the actual workplaces at home.
So it's a great question. Thank you. And I think that I want to just expand it a little bit first and say that the current reality of people with disabilities and work is that a lot of them are not in a position like they can work because they're just not in the sectors that allow people who are in those sectors to work. And so I think that looking at that is really, really important systemically for our country to see where people with disabilities are and what kind of precarious employment that they actually have.
Maureen, so, I just want to jump in because at least for me, you cut out a little bit. And I think you were hitting on the point that not all people with disabilities have work that they can do from home, right? Is that what you were? Okay, and then so please continue. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew.
Thank you so much. That's weird. I usually project quite well. So anyway, so what I was trying to say is that we have to look at systemic issues as well for people with disabilities, and I think that so that aside, I think that if employers and businesses do want to make sure that people with disabilities are able to work from home, it's the accommodations that still need to be out there, right? What did I had this, like, so for example, the employer is going to absorb the cost of providing a computer, taking it out to their worker.
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna just interrupt, and I'm hoping that we can work out the technical difficulties, but I will circle back to that because it's a really interesting point. And I'm gonna bring in a question from the audience now. I'm very delighted that people have written in. From Deep D to everybody, so feel free to jump in, anyone who wants to sort of speak to this. And Deep D is asking, can you offer some strategies for how leaders can ask the right questions of people who might need an accommodation? So I know, you know, there's always this sort of discomfort with asking how can I help, or how can I make something more accessible for you? And so if anybody just has points on how to sort of broach those conversations from a leadership point of view, that would be great.
Maybe,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
sure. I'll start by saying that when I was applying to Google, I think it was an open process of just empathy. I remember a conversation with my recruiter asking proactively, we realize there's a diversity of applicants, of candidates coming into Google, and we want to really understand what needs that you might have. And so I think just coming from a place of openness, and just asking very broadly what kinds of accommodations would be helpful. And I was able to just say right off the bat, like, I cannot reach the whiteboard. A lot of coding interviews are done on the whiteboard, but I don't have the arm strength to do that. And so they kind of arranged the accommodation of doing my coding interview from a laptop. So a lot of accommodations, I think, as others have said, they don't have to be very expensive kinds of things. It's really just about having an open mindset and a willingness to listen and a lot of empathy from one person to the other.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dianna. Yeah, it's nice to hear how that kind of came about for you. Would anyone else like to speak to sort of broaching the conversation of accommodations from a leadership point of view?
I feel leaders are a little bit hesitant because they don't want to step on the wrong toes or say the wrong things. So I think that there's a little bit of hesitation. And what I would suggest is really open-ended questions, like, bringing up something that's really working well for the employee and what you could do that would make it better, what could have been done to make it better or easier for them in the sense of production or ability. Like, let them bring it up if you like, but the idea is to get them to tell you more. So pick an area that's really of interest that you want to bring up, and then ask them questions about that and let it evolve naturally, if that will help to kind of bring more comfort to the conversation. And it creates a psychological safety where the employee will be more apt also to open up if it's more of a conversation rather than just a straightforward question, right? So making it conversational and kind of like about something that they would love to talk about, which is where are they doing well already, and what would help them or make it better for them. What would they have liked? They'll probably identify that. What would they like to see more of?
I agree. And Diane's suggestion about the empathy is really, really critical. Working from the person's needs, and ask them. They have a good sense of what they need to be accommodated well, kind of thing. And it's in the supervisor's manager's best interest to do that, because they want to get the most out of the talent that they have hired, kind of thing. So really work with the person to find out, ask them what they need to make their work well for them, kind of thing. And it's not a one-time thing. I think that's something people don't realize, is that you have to revisit it on a regular basis. People's needs change through the week, through the year, kind of thing, so that it's something that you revisit on a regular basis. You want to always check in, reevaluate, reassess to make sure it's still working well for the person, see if there's anything else that you can do to help them, kind of thing. And that way it's a win-win for both, the worker and the employer.
Awesome. Thanks, Emile. Yeah, that's a good point. Checking in as we go, things change, right? Look, I want to circle back to Maureen, and the last little bit of our conversation was about people once they're in positions. But something that you were getting to was that, not very many disabled people are in these positions that are able to work from home. So I'd love for you to just expand on that for us if possible.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay now? Oh, good. Good for now, right? So I think that the idea is that if the accommodations are set up at home for those who are able to work from home, then the employer really has to take on that responsibility. And I also want to just jump on to the conversation that's just been happening. And I think that the idea is that the workplace has to be set up as accommodating right from the start. So if you are saying right from the get-go, right from the recruitment and the onboarding of all of your staff, if you're saying we are a disability confident or we are an inclusive workplace, and therefore we will be accommodating, because one of the questions we get a lot is, well, if Joe doesn't come into work until 10 o'clock in the morning, how is that fair to me? But our comment back to that is, well, but if you set yourself up as an inclusive employer in the very beginning, you won't get those questions.
Can I jump in? I really like that point, Maureen. And I'm thinking about that standard we developed where we made sure we developed a management system standard for disability, right? So how to accommodate workers' health needs over the time they're with the organization. And we really made a big point of, Maureen was a big proponent of it too, is making sure that the front end, the recruitment, hiring, and onboarding was inclusive and accommodating of people's needs. Because if it doesn't start at the beginning, as you point out, it's not going to work, because they have to come on board with a sense that they belong and that they're included and that their talent is being capitalized on in a meaningful way for them as a worker as well as for the employer.
And here's a question that I think there might be some folks out there listening and they say, this all sounds wonderful. And also how do we get to that point? So does anyone have sort of starting points for, maybe someone's listening and they're an employer, a small business owner, they're already dealing with a downturn in business. How do we then sort of jump into that process of trying to make the workplace more accessible? And that's for, invisible disabilities, mental health, every sort of experience out there.
I would say, kind of looking at our current situation with 2020, I mean, everything we've been kind of going through, we're going through together. And so why not leverage that? It is a perfect time to start creating culture change. It's a perfect time to connect. It's a perfect time to start using compassion in places and environments where maybe we hadn't been open to it before. I think people are very open and receptive to it right now. So certainly, as small business owners, really starting to have these conversations, even considering being vulnerable yourself to start that conversation, whether it's during a break or, perhaps in a meeting where you invite a professional in, where they can actually start the discussion and create group situations or activities where people are engaging on that level, and that's the purpose. So being sort of purposeful around it and creating that shift is definitely possible. And now it's a better time, is probably the best time, is while we're in transformation to start the transition. It's going to be the easiest time. So it's actually a good thing.
So I'd like to also jump in here, and because I love Sajel's positivity. I come at it from a little bit more of a skeptical perspective, because I think that we've ripped, and I've said this many times, we've ripped the curtain open and we've seen the multi-tiered way that we treat our society. When CERB came in, it was $2,000 for people who were working. And the average across Canada for disability supports for people with disabilities is $1,000. That tells what our value system is. And I think that systemically we have to have a hard look at who we are as a country and what we value as a country. And then absolutely talking about being positive, as Sajel is talking about, it's so important. But I really do think that we need some government policies around this. And we need to make sure that we're completely on top of this, because when a pandemic happens again, if we're in the same position as we're in now, and people with disabilities are in the same position of poverty, of ending their lives of care, then it's a shame on us as a society.
Yeah, and I want to kind of just sort of acknowledge what you're saying, Maureen, because we're experiencing this at three different levels, right? There's the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. And certainly for us to see changes at the macro level, we need to be instituting changes throughout the system. So what I'm talking about is more at the micro and meso, where we can take the power into our own hands and start to make these changes at home to make life bearable day to day, and in hopes of supporting and trying to advocate and create the change at political and policy level as well, for us as a country. So we need to be seeing the change throughout the system.
I also want to jump in there because I think Maureen and Sajel are bringing up excellent points about the different levels at which change is happening. And I think a lot of this comes back to the fundamental definition of disability, actually, because traditionally disability has been defined in the medical model, where disability comes from the individual defect, the genetic mutation that leads to impairment. But really what we need to do is shift our perspective from this traditional medical model that places the burden on the individual to instead a social model that places the burden on society to accommodate the needs of the population, the needs of people who have all sorts of different abilities. And it's the lack of the social structure support that causes disability. So if society as a whole can provide the support, we are enabling instead of disabling.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yes.
hit it
Yeah.
right on. Oh, sorry.
I totally agree too. Well, Sajel mentioned it before. Culture change is really critical. We have to create a new normal where everybody can participate. It's a human rights model that we all have a right to be active participants in society. But there is work to be done at all levels. We all have a lot of learning to do because and changing the way we do things now, whether it's the built environment or the social environment. And there's policy changes that are. Maureen's right about some of the issues she brings up. We have to think about, some guaranteed minimum income for people. What's a decent living for everybody, whether you're able to work sometimes or all the time or never, kind of thing. We all have to be on a level playing field. To treat some populations differently than others is just not really an equitable society and an inclusive society. If people with disabilities get $1,000 and people who are unemployed get $2,000.
Yeah, and Dianna, I just want to kind of piggyback on how you said the medical model is so deficit. And we see that in the way that, we're told in psychology as well, on diagnosis and treatment versus looking at mental health from a psychosocial model. And that's changing the way that even as practitioners, the way we see our clients and see our students. Notice I didn't say patients, right? So language matters, and changing our frameworks and the way that we're approaching everything. The change is happening. We're certainly seeing it in the world of psychology. Like I said, the positive psychology movement has had great advancement over the 10 years. And so we're seeing it at that level, and hopefully we'll start, with the pandemic and with politics and everything that's been happening, we're in a wave of change at the moment. And I see it as opportunity, because I don't think we would have changed without that shove. And so now's the time to innovate.
Thank you, Sajel. Yeah, and unfortunately, we are wrapping up our conversation, but I have one more question from the audience, and it's from Carmen. And Carmen wants to know, for sure, working from home is positive in lots of ways because it is flexible, and for those who have access to it, as Maureen pointed out, it can be positive, and for those who don't, that's unfair. But Carmen is really asking, what about the social isolation side and the sort of downside of, not having that in-person interaction? So Carmen was asking specifically Marina and Dianna, but if everyone wants to just maybe do a 30-minute sort of response to that, and then we'll wrap up our conversation, that would be great. So we'll start with you, Dianna, please.
Yeah. So I feel this very deeply because I'm working from home, I'm working remotely. I don't think I've seen another human being outside of my parents in several months now. And I think the best way that I'm trying to combat this now is just by checking in, by proactively reaching out to friends, and by arranging, these video kinds of meetings and check-ins and hanging out. Like, I think in a way I've actually been able to do more, to have more meetings and to kind of be connected to more people. But I do agree that it's a tough situation not seeing folks in person. But I think the best that we can do is connect virtually and
Yeah.
go beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, take that extra effort for sure. Maureen, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. I think that it's a real problem, and I think that social isolation is something that's critically important for us to be looking at, because again, we're looking at people with disabilities who are not necessarily in an ability to be working from home, and so therefore they are on the CERB or they are on some other type of social assistance. And if they don't have high-speed internet and they don't have, if we're talking about poverty, then we're talking about poverty, and social isolation for poverty is horrible, and so we do have to make sure that we're looking at those social policies that influence people with disabilities, of all kinds of disabilities, during pandemics. And I think that it's a very, very good point.
That's a really good point about access to internet as well as, an accessibility issue. And I'm so sorry to be rushing through at the end here, but Emile, give us your last thoughts on the socialization.
Okay, yeah, as humans, we're social animals. We all need to connect with each other. And so I think it's all of our responsibilities when, we're in this kind of situation to reach out to our friends and colleagues and neighbors kind of thing and try to make it work. We're all suffering, but some people are more marginalized than others for a variety of reasons kind of thing. And I just think we all have to take it upon ourselves to reach out to all the people around us to make sure we all feel connected the best we can be.
It's a good reminder. Thank you, Sajel.
Yeah, I'm again going to be the optimist here and just say, look, video conferencing was like something I saw on the Jetsons as a kid. We didn't think it was going to happen in our lifetime. So look, Maureen, you're laughing, so I know that you know what I'm talking about. How lucky are we that we have this? So it's great to connect and to reach out. I'm going to encourage people to don't have service conversations. Don't talk about the weather. Don't talk about talk beyond the how are you? Ask deeper questions. Use this as an opportunity to really get to know people. Ask your parents what they were like before you were even born. Get to know people on a deeper level and connect deeply. The other thing is when you're not connecting, and you don't need to be connecting all the time, because I'm in a household with a family, I don't get any alone time at all. And so how are you doing that? How are you giving yourself self-care? So
that's a really good reminder too.
Well, because we forget, right? I was near burnout by May because I was bouncing between the office and the kitchen. So,
yes.
I'm encouraging.
Thank you, Sajel. And I would love to continue for another hour, but this is unfortunately our time. And I just want to thank everyone for that engaging conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emile Tompa, Dianna Hu, Maureen Haan, and Sajel Bellon. And of course, to our moderator this evening, TD Fellow on Disability and Inclusion, Aimee Louw. Also, a shout out to everyone asking questions. We had a very active chat tonight, and I know we've been following the conversation there as well.